So with that, I'll kick it over to Rich.
Thank you for that warm-up. Still catching my breath. Let's see here. Oh, there we go. So I just wanted to offer just a very quick background, a little bit building upon what Eric had said, just to give some context for why we're up here and who we've got up here. Who we have up here, I'm supposed to have memorized everybody's roles, and I've already forgotten most. So I'm just going to introduce them by name and organization, if you don't mind. Right to my left here is Jill Powers with California ISO, and then no relation, John Powers. Next there, who's down the line further? I can't see.
Right here.
Oh, is Patty Cook from ICF, and Michael Brown, who you probably all know from NV Energy, and all bringing different. Oh, is Andy around here somewhere? Did I miss Andy? Andy. There's Andy. He's from Duke. Andy Taylor. So interestingly enough, we've got a couple of utility perspectives. We've got a vendor perspective. We've got the wholesale market perspective. We've got a consultant perspective from somebody who's been actually working in and around aspects of FERC 2222 and its implications. So Eric already talked a little bit about this. I'm just going to go into marginally more detail. Dating back 3 years ago, one of the key strategic initiatives for PLMA was to spark DER innovation, and went through a series of steps identifying challenges with integrating DERs and then bringing innovation, use cases, stories, ideas around how to, by way of innovation, address those challenges to kind of ultimately foster more DER adoption. And then the culmination of that work really culminates this year, and as Eric alluded to, this has now been a transition strategic initiative that goes into sparking DER as a grid resource, right? So natural continuum, that'll be part of our next 2-year strategic initiative set. So this past year, that initiative took on, and this was really sparked by Eric, John, Patty, and others on the task force, to take a look at FERC 2222. And just by way of background, for those who don't already know, and very simply put, it's all about removing barriers for the aggregation and participation of heterogeneous DERs into wholesale markets. So that's the undercurrent. For obvious reasons, it bears relevance on the PLMA universe. Eric alluded to this already. We went through a series of 3 previous webinars engaged with FERC themselves to talk about the order. Then a month later, we engaged utilities to talk about their perspective on what this might mean. Finally, we engaged investors in this space to say, to what extent does this policy potentially impact your investment decisions, or how in turn do you help navigate the investments you've made relative to this? So this session here is intended to kind of bring it all back home. Everything we've heard, everything we've seen, get the perspectives of everybody here and say, okay, well, what does it really mean? What can we see, read between the tea leaves and say, okay, where will this possibly affect PLMA membership base across the board? Where may it create some opportunities? Where may it create some challenges? Or does it mean anything at all? So we're going to explore those topics. Good attendance is a good thing. We're going to save a good 15 minutes for questions at the end, because I'm sure all of you might want to probe a bit further on what we discuss. This I've already spoken to, which is, okay, where does this initiative go? Okay, it's going into the operational realm. That's the intent, which, by the way, does bear relevance as it pertains to 2222. So that's the end of my introduction. I did want to offer this. One thing we had talked about as a group is, very quickly, in addition to me giving a quick summary of 2222, we have somebody just to my left here who's actually been living for 2222. Right.
So the compliance roller coaster for the order.
So that's since 2016 or so. I mean, if you date back to the historical, really integration of wholesale.
Yeah, we can give a little bit of background, at least from a California ISO perspective. We received the order, I think, in September of 2020. Mm-hmm. But prior to that, the California ISO had implemented a distributed energy resource provider policy that did acknowledge and set out to create a framework for participation of DERs in aggregation at the wholesale market level. So we had that in place since 2017. So, and we had discussions with FERC. You know, they approved our policy. They were aware of what we were attempting to do in California. And we had talked to them throughout the years prior to the order, you know, coming through in 2020. So we saw that within the order, it largely, you know, followed what we had already established within our tariff. So it wasn't a huge lift for the California ISO. However, you know, this was an order for all ISOs and RTOs. We're one of 9. So there was many, you know, impacts to all of the other ISOs to comply with this order. From the California ISO perspective, right after the order, we kind of reviewed all of the identified items within the order, fairly compliant, but we did identify a few areas that we had to make some changes to. We had to reduce participation requirements. We thought 500 kW minimum requirement was kind of low, but they required us to go down to 100 kW minimum participation requirement. There was some provisions for opting out for small utilities, so we had to go in and make some adjustments to that. We had to align our DER definition, our California ISO definition with FERC's order. They had a slight definition change to it. One of the big areas that have come up in the discussion is double compensation, so we had to address that, mainly just clarification of how we would address double counting of compensation for energy, capacity, or other services that may have been provided by the DER aggregation to other entities. And then the big lift for us was, and you bring up the term heterogeneous modeling of DERs, which really was just bringing in, we had a model, more homogeneous, that did take into account injecting DERs, those that were distributed energy resources injecting onto the grid. We didn't take into consideration demand response as a DER. So this required us to broaden our modeling and broaden our DER aggregation definition to include demand response. So it became a heterogeneous kind of concept, although we're not using that word anymore. We're just, we're just using DER aggregation. And that, within our filing, we term those as a new term because we already had demand response programs. We had integrated both economic and reliability demand response. So we called these DERs distributed curtailment resources. So when we model, we have DERs and distributed curtailment resources. So from an ISO perspective, the main uplift was more on the settlement, because these had to be measured differently. They had to be settled, but we had to have this DER aggregation really settled as an aggregation, but take into account that there might be those that are more metered and those that are baselined. And we had those baseline option methodologies within our tariff, and we could point to those as the means by which we would measure their curtailment contribution to the overall aggregation. So we filed that in July of 2021, July 19th, and we did receive a compliance acceptance of our filing just this past June. But within that, they did ask us to make some changes, so we had to file a second compliance filing. But one of them was kind of unique, and it was, again, related to this difference between a distributed energy resource that is exporting onto the grid or injecting energy onto the grid and demand response. On our initial filing, we said we would have a heterogeneous, but the heterogeneous had to encompass both, had to at least have one injecting resource. And we felt like if it was all if it was all demand response, that would just remain in our DR participation model. FERC did not agree with that. So we've had to adjust and say, okay, so we can have a DER aggregation that's all injecting DERs. We can have a DER aggregations that's just distribution curtailment, demand response, or we could have one that mixes both of them. So we refiled, and we did that in August. We have yet to hear about full compliance, but we've moved forward. I mean, we're in the implementation phase for this new model to include demand response. That was our heaviest lift. We already have tariff authority, all those other kind of items that I've listed here, smaller items, implementable items. But however, for the actual model, we're looking, and we re-requested to FERC. Originally, we thought we could do it this fall, but with the delay in the actual acceptance of the compliance filing, we're looking at a 2024 implementation of that new model. But everything else is available. I mean, DER aggregations have a participation model that will give them access to the wholesale markets. It will give them access to energy, provision of energy service, as well as ancillary services. So that's kind of my historic background.
Yeah, that's a long history.
Thanks.
And thank you for that. I think it does offer a lot of insight as we all move forward more broadly. So a little bit belated, but I wanted to actually offer an icebreaker opportunity for our panelists. Maybe just a minute about yourselves, maybe in context of FERC 2222, if there's a relationship between your current role and the order. And then maybe 10 words or less, what does FERC 2222 mean to you? That's the main thing you think about when you hear those letters and numbers. We can start with John.
Okay. I'm John Powers with Extensible Energy. We make a lightweight building energy control solution, software solution for commercial buildings. That's primarily a customer-facing application, but once you get a building under better control, you can respond to a signal from anywhere. So we're very interested in participating in wholesale and retail markets. And so my one word, I think, what I think of for FERC 2222 is consistency, because we operate nationally. We don't want to learn to do this 912 different times. We want to learn to bring new DERs into market in a way that's consistent from one ISO to another. Basically, we're turning buildings into DERs, and so we need to know, with some consistency and clarity, how do we turn those DERs into monetizable resources in the market?
Patty.
Hi, everybody. I'm Patty Cook. I'm with ICF. I lead our market development and strategy for our clean energy solutions, pilots, and programs. I bump up against FERC 2222 quite a bit with conversations and work that we're doing for our utility clients who are struggling to already sort of evolve their customer programs to enable electrification, reliability, resiliency, and they're trying to figure out, well, why do I care? Why should I care about FERC 2222? How is that relevant to my programs? So I think we're going to be talking a little bit about that today. And when I think of FERC 2222 in 10 words or less, although it's probably a little bit more than 10, I think of it as the wholesale tail wagging the DER dog.
Thanks, Patty. Andy, now I know I couldn't see you before.
Yeah, no problem.
Shouldn't
No
have
problem.
went
Yeah,
back. How about you?
yeah. So Andy Taylor with Duke Energy. I've got to be the dumbest person here, so but I'll try and share my perspective on this from the utility side. I manage the team that registers all these resources in MISO and PJM. So, I mean, literally, I think about how are we going to calculate that megawatt number? How difficult or how much easier, perhaps, will it be to get into PJM and MISO's systems and register these, or perhaps validate what other folks, in our service territory are registering? So it's very real because it's going to land with me, back at Duke, at least in the wholesale markets. And then in terms of my takeaway, I'm going to use the term tempered optimism. I'm optimistic about what this brings, how this kind of help moves the industry along, and I'm an engineer, right? So I'm going to wait until I see some of it, really materialize into something very useful.
Thank you. And Michael, what do you have to offer?
Sure. I think we'll see that not all utilities are created the same or in the same place. In my current role, I provide oversight for rolling out DERMS product. I work in product development for developing grid services from DER aggregations. And I'm developing strategy for integrated customer solutions across clean energy, DSM, DR, DER, and transportation programs. So when I think about my involvement in my role from the product development perspective, looking for opportunities as we move into the future to evolve the program design and the technologies that support the programs, to potentially be able to take advantage of a market opportunity. That requires, well, okay, what are the market participation requirements, and what would a roadmap look like for our customer program aggregations to get there? And then from a DERMS development perspective, FERC 2222 requires coordination with third-party aggregators and the distribution utility. So we're trying to track what that means for functional and integration requirements for our back office enterprise systems like DERMS. So back to you, Rich.
Was that 10 words or less on the?
Oh, the 10 words or less. I guess I'd have to say we see mid to longer term opportunities to enhance program value.
Oh, there we go.
You almost got it.
Is that 10? Was it? Is that 10?
Okay, great. And we had all prepared in a few different conversations in the last few weeks, and I think one of the real fruitful parts of those calls that I hope we can bring forward, kind of now that we're through some of the kind of groundbreaking material or icebreaking material, is conversations. So I'm taking a very broad brush step back here. PLMA membership, right? Let's think about what that is. It's utilities, it's consultants, it's aggregators, and a distinction that John brought up on our first call was, hey, now, maybe in recent memory, we're talking about aggregators really participating in more distribution or retail markets, but now we have to consider folks at that next level, the wholesale market participation. So that's another one of our constituents here. And then we've got, obviously we've got vendors, technology vendors, and we've got, consultancies. So, and at this point, free for all, weigh in as you wish. Why should, put on multiple hats here, why should PLMA care? Why should our member base care about 2222? What are some of the risks, opportunities, if any? Just share some thoughts, and we could kind of talk through some of those things. Anybody can jump in.
I'll start off. So, just from the utility perspective, right, and it's just mine, and yes, Mike, just one utility's perspective. But if you're in a market, how do you participate? How do you? Are you fully participating in all the markets already, all the opportunities to you? Michael, you had mentioned program design. Do we need to, the historical programs we've had oftentimes have been for something like 30 years aggregated homogenously, right, Jill, up into a wholesale market resource, right? It could be load switches, water heaters, usually done cost effectively. So are those programs and offerings going to continue to provide value for my customers, right? Do I need to change that? Am I aware? And even if you're not, the other, just real quick on, why does it matter to our customers? Well, if I'm not in a market, or I'm not, like from a utility perspective, I don't want a market, or the takeaway for me, again, just distilling it down maybe, Rich, is what are the forces that have culminated into this order, right? DER implementation happens everywhere. Doesn't matter if you're in a market or not. And I hope I'm not taking us off the topic of FERC 2222, but I see that as the culmination in those markets of the recognition that those resources need to be valued right. So if you're a utility even not in a market, you're probably doing DR today, right? I mean, you're here, right? Why is that valuable to you? And you probably have customers who want solar PV on their roof or are adopting EVs. Your grid's probably harder to balance. It's going to provide value to you as well. So I don't think within the utility realm anyway that it necessarily matters if this order on whatever the compliance date is, I'm going to have to, I wrestle with, my obligations at that point in time, but it's everywhere, right? It's valuable, I think, in a much broader sense.
I would agree, and I don't know if folks had a chance to listen to the second webinar that I hosted with the other utilities, but they pretty much echoed the same thing, that it wasn't clear to them that wholesale value was the holy grail, and even though FERC 2222 was a good forcing function for them, it made them realize, wow, I have to be able to see these assets, I have to have telemetry, I have to have visibility, I've got to have a billing system that can acknowledge these things. So it was a great forcing function for that, but I think that they realized that their customer programs can optimize those resources in a way that doesn't need to be in the wholesale market. If they're looking to achieve policy goals, decarb, electrification, or resiliency, those are things that customer programs can do without even touching the wholesale market. So it's almost like, are we asking the right question? And I do think that FERC 2222 forced those questions to be asked, and utilities are now sort of understanding that, wow, we've got to, get a few things in order. But I'm not sure, it really put the emphasis on the right thing. I don't think wholesale value is really.
Well, I'll pile onto that a little bit with, I think the question, why should utilities care? And I think over the past few days, we've seen that as we evolve our DR programs, including DERs, and particularly electric vehicles, that our distribution level challenges are increasing rapidly. And so to the extent that our programs are evolving for targeted dispatch to support distribution grid reliability, and yet there's the potential for third-party aggregators to use those same resources in a wholesale market, nobody wants unintended consequences in service transformers or substation transformers to start blowing because we didn't get this thing right. Exactly. So we need to pay particular attention to what are the actual coordination procedures, and what cost will those impose upon us as utilities. I think another thing that comes to mind is the competitive landscape for enrolling customers and DER devices into programs. So what does that mean for a customer potentially receiving multiple offers from their battery or car vendor and receiving offers from the utility for programs? So we got an increasing customer engagement challenge as if it wasn't hard enough already. So, those are a few things that come to mind from a utility perspective. From a technology provider perspective, and then maybe I'll pass it off to John, for the types of technology providers that are providing DERMs and other products to utilities, well, what does that mean? I think I mentioned before that there'll probably be some new integration and functional requirements for coordination. For technology providers that are selling in-use devices to customers that have, the end-use customer, and yet they're trying to engage other customers with the distribution utility or in the wholesale market, that's not an easy challenge to balance those objectives, right? How do you ensure that your in-use customer is achieving their bill savings and retail rate optimization objectives at the same time that you'd like to try to monetize utility programs and wholesale market operation, that's not an easy thing to solve. So good luck there. But well, maybe John, you've got some additional perspective on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the different value streams, as to use a popular phrase, are important to sort of weigh together. And we try and do that for our customers. We try and save money from retail bills while encouraging participation in wholesale or retail DR markets, right? But I mean, to step back further to Patty's comment about the tail wagging the dog here, the wholesale market value of plugging an electric vehicle into the grid and playing the wholesale market with your electric vehicle is so bizarre and foreign to the buyers of electric vehicles, okay? I bought my electric vehicle to drive, and you know, our buildings are kind of the same way. Our customers bought their HVAC systems to keep their building cool, right? They didn't buy them to play the wholesale market for a fraction of a cent every time they do something slightly different. So this all has to fit within the customer, you know, you reference customer engagement. Customer engagement has to recognize that the customer doesn't call these DERs, right? They call them my air conditioner or my car or other things, and we're the ones introducing this weird vocabulary. So I think the reason I hit on the word consistency as what I hope for in 2222 is this has to be simple or it's going nowhere, okay? The end customer owns all these distributed energy resources and they use them for a reason. If we're going to access them for grid value, we had better make this wildly simpler for customers to be able to participate. And I think your point about customer engagement, whether it's by an aggregator or by a utility, is critical because they aren't thinking about this.
And I even think the term grid value is not precise enough. Although I agree with the way you referenced it, but you know, if you look at the distribution system and what it needs to be reliable, you know, I think there's I like to call it the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I mean, the utility needs to meet the distribution needs first.
Yes.
And if there's anything left over, maybe it can be aggregated, you know, and monetized in the wholesale market. But you know, I don't want my utility, you know, using, you know, my DERs before they consider what's needed to keep my service, you know, transformer functioning. That's, you know, just kind of basic order of operations.
I think I'll just make one comment about the order, and maybe we talked about demystifying the order. It really, you know, it was an order for the ISOs and RTOs, not an order for the utilities. And it was just the enablement of, well, recognition of a DER aggregation as a resource, potential resource, and enablement of their participation at the wholesale market level. Not really a requirement that they had to, and I think since 2016 when we introduced DER, our policy, DER provider policy, we've had some rethinking. I mean, we've worked with our utilities, talked about the difficulties with the T&D coordination. We set up working groups on T&D coordination. We had white papers, you know, identifying objectives between, you know, a distribution system operation, transmission system operation, and the DER provider, and, you know, needing to meet all of those different objectives. But it really came down to a choice by DER aggregators, whether or not they wanted to bring them into the markets. If they found it very difficult, it was not simple. When you get to a wholesale level and you are participating in the wholesale markets and providing services, specifically, you know, reliability services, it gets difficult. There's a lot of requirements around that. While we did try and minimize, because that was the whole intent, is to look at things in aggregation and not have individual requirements on all of the different resources, there still is some requirements that may be too difficult to meet, to bring into the wholesale market. So again, an order for the ISOs, but not necessarily, you know, DER aggregators or utilities.
Yeah, that's a good point, Patty. And I wanted to talk just a little bit about to what extent, with California having allowed for aggregation participation in forms in the wholesale market, to what extent has that thus far been successful or not successful, and what are some of the reasons behind that? Oh, did I say Patty? I meant
me?
Jill.
Okay,
So sorry.
okay.
But
But we can ping off
We
each
could both
other
talk
on
about
that.
it.
Not wildly successful. So again, one of the reasons why we went forward with this, with the renewable integration, there was a big push by our state. We recognized that there was going to be a lot of deployment of DERs, mainly energy storage, within the distribution system, both in front of and behind the meter. There were big incentives to deploy these. So that was kind of one of our initial reasonings for saying, okay, if they did want to aggregate, we wanted to minimize the participation requirement, which was 1 megawatt for an individual DER to participate. And we have a lot of DERs participating at the wholesale level. They just have to have a minimum size of half a megawatt or, half a megawatt. Energy storage is down to 100 kW now. So we have a lot of DERs that meet that minimum size and could directly participate without having to aggregate. There's interconnection rules that were in place for it. They can be a resource adequacy resource. So we have about 2 gigawatts of participation by DERs. What we didn't have was DER aggregation, adds more complication, provided this enablement, this participation model, and enabling them to bring it to market. We had about 7 entities that did sign up as aggregators or DER providers, as we term it. But we have not had one successful DER aggregation participating in the markets since 2016.
Go ahead, Patty, did you want to say something?
So I think, the word aggregator gets used a lot. And, typically it's used in the context of someone that's monetizing a resource for wholesale value. And I think one of the things that I've been thinking a lot about is the fact that, in a way, our demand-side management programs, everything that you all do in the room today, those are programs that aggregate resources. So in some respects, we're all program aggregators. I think what's different is that instead of sort of having programs that conserve energy efficiency or reduce the base load energy efficiency or an emergency event-based demand response, programs are going to be evolving to manage load in a more flexible way to meet a hierarchy of needs, perhaps starting with distribution needs. So it's really thinking about program aggregation from the lens of kind of like the bottom up, what are customers choosing? What do they want behind the meter? And then what is the impact of enabling those choices on the distribution grid? And what sort of signals and tariffs and incentives do all of us as sort of program aggregators want to encourage and include in our designs to facilitate that kind of value for the utilities? And Michael, you tell me whether I'm completely smoking something, but.
No, that's the way we see it. I mean, we are an aggregator.
Right.
At least in Nevada, that's what we do.
Yeah, and I'll just hit on that a little bit more there, Patty. Just, you didn't say this, and this is a word we like to use a lot, but we have a lot of experience on the utility side, just speaking from Duke's experience, at least on aggregating like resources that are pretty easy to control. It's not a whole lot of touch, right? But turning that into something flexible and then having now a mix of resources that are providing different types of response. I'm not just dropping capacity. Maybe I'm injecting energy. Maybe I'm arbitraging. Maybe I'm providing some kind of frequency or sync reserve, but then taking all that together, right, and orchestrating it in a way that can, on the whole, address some of the challenges that, in no offense, DERs are also kind of causing on the system, right? Mm-hmm. That orchestration, I think, is what I'm very excited about. That's really, it's the next step, right?
And when you think about the level of orchestration that's going to be required for electrification, and what electrification will do on the grid. I call it decentralized or orchestrated decentralization. That level of orchestration will be absolutely critical, which means that the programs that we all run, the resource will need to show up at the meter. It'll need to be a firm resource that's measurable at the meter. It can't be fingers crossed, make believe, I hope it shows up. It will need to show up and be measured at the meter. So little different ecosystem.
We've got about 4 more minutes before I would like to invite folks to start asking questions. So I wanted to try to kind of bring this almost full circle conversation, and it really comes to, from your perspectives, what is the real value of, John mentioned some value propositions earlier, but what do you think the value is? And I guess what I'm asking is, from your own individual, as representation of a whole portion of the segment, the market segment, from your perspective, what is the value of FERC 2222? And John, I hadn't introduced this, to you before, but there's discussions, that Jill was referring to with respect to the wholesale market participation, and Patty alluded to tail wagging the dog. And so when I think about this from somebody like you, I think about objective function being, obviously economic upside, simplicity to the customer. When I think about Michael and Andy, your objective function with respect to DERs on your grids, and Patty, you play, wear a lot of hats in this space, but you can speak to the perspective of your clients, right, in this, and of course, Jill, the ISO. But really, looking through those lenses, is there a value to this of any sort? Is there economic value or otherwise? Is this aligned with the utilities' direction with DERs and how you want or need to use them? So maybe just close us out with talking about a value proposition of this order and how it might manifest to either support or harm, contradict, or otherwise impede your individual objectives.
So I'll start and say that it better support, because the market trends are overwhelming in favor of both more DERs and easier control of DERs, okay? We're doing things technologically that we couldn't have dreamed of doing 10 years ago in buildings, in control of thousands and then millions of devices. And given that there is an increased interest from our customers and an increased ability from tech trends we can all ride on top of, we better make it easy, and I think the intent of 2222 is to make it easier to extract any value that comes from the wholesale market. I'm not going to say how big or small I think that's going to be, or which in the grid services is going to provide the biggest one. I don't have that crystal ball. But all the tech and all the customer decisions in our service territories are forcing the result that FERC 2222 is trying to achieve, is make that value available without requiring it, and see who comes.
Go ahead. I'm especially curious to hear about alignment, misalignment, or deviations from the utility perspective. And then Patty, I'd love to hear you circle back to you. Michael, where do you see this?
Well, you asked me, I guess, about the benefits.
Well, I'm more asking if you have a perspective within your utility, your jurisdiction, with respect to DERs.
Okay, well, let me just clarify that it isn't as if there is a utility perspective, because I can guarantee you there's so many different perspectives inside our own organization, and part of the issue is there's a steep learning curve as to what it is and what it isn't. But I can tell you an immediate benefit is that 2222 has gotten so much more attention than 719, 745, or 841, I think, the battery. And it may be because executives at utilities are looking at a tsunami of DERs coming and thinking that for some reason, the FERC 2222 is dramatically different than what we had in the past. I think the jury's out on that, right? Will the market for third-party aggregators develop or not? Well, we certainly have to track it. But some other issues that come up through this learning curve are, as I mentioned, what does it mean for utilities? we've got to work through dramatically increased focus on IT security concerns related to DERs, whether or not that's for 22 or not. Some folks are jumping to that conclusion. Oh wait, your DERMS is going to be aggregating, hundreds of thousands of devices and having an impact on the transmission grid. Oh, we have to lock that thing down, and it has to be NERC-CIP compliant. I was like, I don't think it's going to work if you lock it down, right? Because we need two-way communication. So there's this whole learning curve that we need to go through. But as we go through it, we'll be keeping our eyes out for, like, as I mentioned before, those mid to long-term opportunities. Is it an additional opportunity to value stack as we maintain our objective on integrating DERs for distribution grid reliability? Traditionally, it's been avoided cost at our utility, but if we can make some additional value out of energy arbitrage or ancillary services, then we're going to try to look at our program designs and technologies and enable it. But it's going to take some time.
Yeah, I mean, I'd second much of that. Not to, just real quick, Rich, I'll try to be quick, but I wanted to hit something on some information that Jill had shared earlier. I'm not necessarily sure if, like, market participation, how much that's an indicator of success in this. Certainly I would like to, we already participate in markets with our, classic resources. And I don't know, I like a challenge. I look forward to trying to figure out how we could, even at the utility level, try to aggregate up some heterogeneous resources and see what that looks like, right? But I bring it back to around, like, what's the customer want? What do they want? Decarbonization? Do I want more flexibility? Like, there are, stepping even back further from the order itself, there are really exciting things here that, I think are going to be necessary over the next decade to figure out. Yeah.
Thank you.
I'm going to circle back to the earliest, your opening, because you had the economist, I think, sitting in this seat saying markets don't necessarily resolve everything. Markets aren't the ones, and I think that's kind of our perspective, that there might be other options. The bottom-up approach we've looked at since we introduced DER aggregation policy, and we're thinking there's a lot to be said about it really more of a bottoms-up approach, and still instead of the order, which is the top-down approaches, really working at the customer level, interfacing between the customer and the distribution system, and providing services there, and any excess then can trickle up to the transmission system.
So in that model, what Jill's referring to is basically the distribution utility becomes sort of like the balancing authority. And the way they do that could be through customer programs. And the benefit of that, I think, is, well, the benefit of FERC 2022 is that it really required, I think, a lot of folks to look hard about, like, what will the implications of this be, and is this the model that I want? I mean, should I be an aggregator? Should a utility be an aggregator? Do I want third-party aggregators animating assets that my customers own for wholesale value? Oh, if I don't want that, then what am I going to do about it? So, I think that's where we are right now. I think there's an opportunity to sort of keep 22 in the back of our minds, but really look at, like, what are we going to do to enable customer choice, and sort of design that bottom-up distribution system operator model that I think can achieve grid reliability and also achieve policy goals. And I think that's the tricky balance, that all while being affordable. So that's a challenge.
All right, thank you very much, all of you, and I think we'll leave it there so long as there are some questions. I can't see that well, so.
Can I ask the audience a question?
Please.
How many of you watched one or more of the FERC 2222 webinar series that preceded this discussion? Excellent. How many of you know that that's all online, available, free for you to distribute to everyone in your organization who is even vaguely interested in 2222? Who here knows that they can put a FERC expert, utility experts, and investment experts in front of anyone in your organization for no dollars? How many of you know that? So this is a big resource that this group and the education committee and Eric in particular really worked hard to make available beyond just our own membership to anybody in your organizations. Spread the word. Sorry. Now maybe questions.
Yes. Please, yeah. Step forward.
Hi, Mike Mazzola from the University of North Carolina, Charlotte. I want to thank John for being, and I think everyone up there hinted here and there with their language, but John was most overt about humanizing the customer resource. And I think that's going to be very essential. And I think Jill and John and Andy and I have talked at this event and others about how crucial that's going to be. And you know, I own an electric vehicle, and I'm an electrical engineer. I know what charging and discharging does to batteries, and it's very unlikely that I will allow my electric vehicle batteries to be used in a wholesale market resource, okay? And
Regulate.
so I'm just wondering, even the language, I think, needs to evolve a little bit more to customers and then humans who are owning these assets for a purpose, and letting you borrow them is going to be a big challenge, I think. So that's my comment.
Thank you.
Hi. When I first heard about FERC 2222, I was super excited because I'm a person who works for a utility. I was thinking I could bid this stuff in the market, recover some revenue, save my customers some money. Then my ISO came down and said, well, the telemetry requirements on this are going to be we have to measure every DER every 6 seconds, and that has to be transmitted to the ISO every 5 minutes, and that has to be all measured at the retail delivery point. So yeah, as long as every thermostat has a $2,000 meter on it, sure, you can participate. Are all the ISO's RTOs moving in that direction? Do you think?
That's not the direction we took with aggregation. And in fact, the metering and telemetry was kind of our first approach, because I was kind of in the metering and telemetry sphere at the ISO at that time, and we recognized we needed an aggregation, a virtual kind of metering and telemetry solution. So while telemetry, metering is required, you know, for settlement, and revenue metering might be required, we're still open, you know, have some flexibility. We're still looking for solutions, looking to you to come forward with solutions in ways in which we could measure response and reliably measure response and settle those at the wholesale level. From a telemetry perspective, this comes up quite a bit, you know, the requirement for telemetry, but our requirements are pretty high. You have to be 10 megawatts in size to require telemetry, so anything below that doesn't require telemetry. Although if you do provide reliability services or ancillary services, spin, non-spin, or regulation, yes, telemetry would be required. But we don't get into the details, or we're not specific as to how, you know, you would meter, provide that telemetry. We just have at the aggregated level a reasonable accuracy measurement of that telemetry, and we're not indicating how, you know, how that information is obtained or metered. It's just really provide us at these levels of accuracy in an aggregated fashion. So it's just that one interface. So I know it's you know, it comes up quite a bit in the conversation. I don't know where we're missing in terms of, you know, communicating that there is some flexibility in meeting some of those requirements.
Next question.
Thanks a lot. Good panel, Dave Erickson, NHEC. I've been real peripheral to discussions about 2222 in our utility. We're in ISO New England, and you know, so there's been a lot of discussion about it. Still continuing, as Paul mentioned. But what I'm curious about is CAISO experience with your distribution utilities. And I don't know, maybe Michael and Andy, you might have a perspective on this. One of the big concerns in our utility is the need to supervise, the distribution utility to supervise at a dispatch level each and every, you know, essentially bid that clears the market. So, for for example, say you have a distribution feeder that's got an aggregation on it of, 100 batteries, and that feeder goes out, those batteries are in an outage, and that becomes not deliverable. So that's something that the distribution utility has to like check off, and so that creates an enormous overhead for the distribution utility and for the the IT requirements and everything else to monitor all those DER aggregations. Are you finding that as an issue with your distribution utilities, or are people like worried about that? Or?
Yeah, absolutely. The initial conversations when we did, when we went to our Board of Governors to get the approval on the policy, our utilities stepped up forcefully to indicate their concern, particularly on some of those issues that you bring up. The ISO, California ISO decided to kind of still take the step to just, say, again, this is enabling, building that bridge and enabling the wholesale market participation, but not really resolving all of the identified issues that related to transmission, distribution, coordination, potentially the need for a distribution system operator to kind of come in between, the DER provider and the ISO. We did identify, because again, we were looking at everything at, this was way back when we were looking at, what's the minimum, we just want to kind of do the, crawling phase, get some of these aggregations started. We have, communication methods already in place, so we identified all of those with our distribution operations. And that included, because this was a holdover from demand response, where we do share, kind of not bid information, but dispatch information on these resources, again, that are an aggregation. So we had some things in place. Clunky, not fully automated, but they were in place, and the hope was that we would have some of these aggregations coming forward, minimal participation, and then we could start working and building off of what we, experienced with operating them at the wholesale level. Unfortunately, we didn't get there. We did, like I said, we had multiple, I think 2 years of working groups with the distribution, with, our utilities and distribution companies. But we didn't, get to a resolution other than identifying what was currently in place and how we could leverage what was currently in place.
We have about a minute left, and I don't know if there's any other questions, but I did want to point everybody to Eric.
There's one more.
One more
Oh,
question.
there's one. Sorry. Okay.
see you.
I can't see, so you just yell.
Yeah, this is building on David's question as well. So I think this may be a concern for multi-state ISOs like PJM and New England, where I think they didn't want to be prescriptive as you have Liberty with California and New York, where they defined an EDC, and from the way I read it, it's like the EDC is an enabler platform that allows the DER aggregators to participate, and then we still have to ensure reliability of operations despite the market bids and providing services and so on. Again, I did not see the distribution utility being able to be an aggregator, because they have two terms, an EDC, electric distribution company, and there's an aggregator, or DERA. And so it seems like those could be two independent functions. So that being said, I guess the question, my question for the panel is, like, how do you see putting the reliability of operations back in the center of distribution grid operations with the FERC order framework? And some of it is technological, some of it is policy, but I think that just seems very nebulous. That's something that I think we have not addressed so far, I think.
I don't think the FERC order addresses that. I think this is relegated to the states, and they're going to make the decision as to how this might all play out in terms of relegating a distribution system operator that would interface with the California ISO at the wholesale level. So all I can really say is the California ISO has positioned itself to either work with, directly with a distribution system operator or an aggregator. So we didn't preclude, participation or that interfacing with either of those. But again, there's a lot of work that's being done right now at the state level to kind of, look at a DSO construct.
I want to thank all of you for your questions. If I'm missing another one, just kick me. Before we say thank you to our panel, I wanted to directly thank Eric Van Orden, who's really the brainchild of this whole series, saw its relevance for our entire PLMA universe, and has really put this together over the last 5 months or so and done a fantastic job, and this is the culmination of that work. So firstly, I'd like maybe collectively offer gratitude to Eric and to our panelists today for spending time with us.